Welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, where today's brightest minds in the medical device industry go to get their most useful and actionable insider knowledge, direct from some of the world's leading medical device experts and companies.
Innovation thrives when true quality is the focus instead of documentation for documentation's sake. Greenlight Guru Quality and Clinical gives engineers and clinicians one real-time platform. Build faster and prove safety sooner. Join the leaders at www.greenlight.guru. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Global Medical Device Podcast. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'm the host for today's episode. And today I want to talk about finding the right talent and attracting the right talent for your medical device organization. This is something that not every medical device company really has a strong process for. We're a very process-driven industry, and this is maybe one that not everybody has a good process for. And so I brought in Kirk Petyo from Talent Factory Recruiting. Kirk Petyo is redefining MedTech hiring. He's the managing partner at Talent Factory Recruiting. He connects mid to small medical device and life sciences companies with top tier engineering and regulatory talent. And with 20 plus years in the game, he's not just filling roles, he's building powerhouse teams. And I could attest to what I've seen him do, but we can maybe talk about that later. But Talent Factory's 88.25% fill ratio, at least from what I understand, it seems to crush the industry standard. So they don't just source candidates, they're trying to find the right ones from class 1 to class 3 devices in medical device, biotech, diagnostics. They place experts who drive innovation. So if you want to fix your hiring process, hopefully we can talk about that and get the insights. But I kind of get a little long-winded there. How are you doing, Kirk?
Good. I'm good. That was a great intro. I'm really excited to spend some time with you, Etienne. And from the first moment that I met you a couple of years ago and doing some networking and some referrals, I knew that our relationship and conversations were going to go past just that one interaction. And so I'm excited to be able to provide some high level knowledge of the recruiting industry, how it pertains specifically to MedTech, biotech, medical devices, things like that. Hopefully there are some takeaways from regulatory, quality, executive leaders that, whether your company is big or small, that there could be some value adds there. So I'm just excited to spend some time with you, and thanks for allowing me to be a part of this.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here. It's funny when I think about working with talent recruitment and different things, there's lots of different directions we could go. But the thing that I'm most interested in is from and I don't want to get you into IP because I know you have lots of different things that you, as your process of doing things, you have, like I said, I mentioned that fill rate, it's really awesome what you're doing over there. So I'm not trying to get into the secret sauce, but what I do want to hear about is how do you differ the companies who are sort of doing okay versus the companies who are really magnetic brands and they're just attracting talent. I'm curious if you can talk about how you build that magnetic brand as a client and attracting those different roles that they're really trying to fill. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the secret sauce, the individuals that are interested in the secret sauce can spend some time with me one-on-one. And hopefully we'll be able to get some of that, after this podcast releases. It's really interesting because I talk to clients about this all the time. And when you talk about building a magnetic brand, I think it first and foremost comes down to being able to understand the values of what you're trying to build that brand on. And, what is it that you want your organization to stand out as? Is it a company that's focused on opportunity? Is it growth? Is it profit sharing? Is it stock? Is it bonus? Is it hybrid? Are you working on a fun, new, exciting device? Is it something that's new to the market? Are you big? Or are you small? I can probably go a list of another 10 or 20 more things, but it's really important for you as the organization to define what is it that we want to focus on first and foremost, and then how do we create a message around that so that people within the market are excited about that. That kind of dovetails into, not going into the secret sauce, but when we talk to candidates, we really try to understand, we call them value drivers. And those value drivers of what is important to that candidate because their life needs to be better at your organization than somewhere else. And if you're not able to tell that authentic story, if you're not able to do anything outside of creating job postings and putting up a few things on LinkedIn and they're not part of your story and what's important to you, and you don't have that dynamic, inspiring leader, that doesn't matter how big the company is. It could be the manager, the director, the president, the executives, whatever it may be. All of that comes into play. And I believe it all comes down to that candidate experience, comes down to doing all of these little things that all make up for a big dynamic brand that you're trying to create. And those are all those little things, they add up and I think really create and separate good versus average companies in the market.
One of the things I'm curious too about, because we're kind of focusing on medtech or medical device industry when we talk about this, but it really is a little bit broader than that even. And our audience is medical device focused. So when I say it's broader, what I'm talking about is, what about pulling in people from outside the industry? What about pulling in people who are fantastic software developers who know nothing about software as a medical device, or fantastic mechanical engineers who've never done a design controls or risk management matrix? And I'm just going to go real quick into this. When I came to the industry, I was blown away by the amount of documentation that's required. And a lot of people are there's a little shell shock going on. And so I want to educate the industry and outside the industry. Hey, this is what it takes, and you can make it easy. But what is something that we could do as a medical device industry to attract those A players who, instead of going to Tesla or instead of going to, trying to go to Mars and all these other different things, they want to actually solve the things that are really hurting the people we love the most? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think that's an interesting topic because, I supported defense and aerospace and medical device for the majority of my 20 years in the industry. And kind of lump that into regulated, some sort of regulated environment. And regulated could be different for all different types of people, from automotive, even some consumer and industrial products. You've got DoD and aerospace, you've got medical products, you've got pharma. This is quote unquote regulated in some aspects, SOPs, processes, systems in place. And so your question about how do we bring A players to the team is, you look at capability versus competencies. The competency is what the person is going to come to your organization on day one. That is their knowledge, their history, their experience, their education, so on and so forth. Their capability is what they can learn, where they can grow, their impact on the organization, and how they're going to bring more than just their education and experience. And so I say that because I've been in many situations. One in particular was, there was a big defense company here in Chicago that needed to hire 40 plus C++ object oriented developers within a Linux based system. That's not very easy to do. And they wanted to do that in 6 months.
Wow.
And we did it. And it was a very successful engagement. We placed just under 200 people with them in under 10 years. But the way that we did it is, we took out the competency aspect and made it and looked at, okay, what are the true must-haves for this candidate to be successful? And you have to have some sort, when you get into when you get into medical device, you have to have some sort of process driven behind your design. You can't be all in ad hoc and expect it to meet, FDA certifications and processes and things like that. And so you have to understand that process is part of the design, part of the development. If you want great candidates, you don't just look at based of what their competency is and what they have. It's based on where they can go and what they can do in the future.
That's really interesting, because I don't think I've ever made that exact delineation between capability and competence. And I like that, the way you describe that, almost capability being the ceiling that you're able to bust through, or how high can you go in different directions. That's really neat. I'm curious then, if we go maybe kind of go a step further into this, when those companies are looking at those different candidates, I mean, you talk 200 over 10 years, that's a lot. How do you know that this person in front of me is a good worker? Maybe shifting the gears a little bit to the company itself when they're hiring those people, how do I know this is a good worker and not just a good interviewer?
Yeah. Well, I think that, interviewing is a challenge for a lot of companies. Like I can attest there's times, over my career in 20 years where I've done a good and a bad job of that. And, I think you're lying to yourself if you say that you're not always constantly improving as an organization when it comes to interviewing and bringing in talent. Talent is one of your biggest expenses, and it's going to continue to be that. And trying to find and attract the right talent for your organization is always going to be a challenge. And so, when I think about, bringing in the right people, first and foremost, I think there's got to be a structure to it. And yeah, I think your audience is mostly regulatory and quality folks, being a QMS system. So maybe they would like that, having a structured process.
Right.
But, you have to have something that's a benchmark that you can constantly revert back to and say, okay, looking at apples and oranges, looking into an A/B comparison, how does this match? And are we looking at things in the same bucket? The other thing that I look at and think about is, when you start to dig into individuals' roles and can they articulate specifically what they did and how they did it? And you can call it the BS meter, you can call it whatever you want. But, when you start to talk to somebody and say, tell me about the system that you were a part of. What did you guys make? What was your responsibility? What challenges did you face on that? How did you overcome that challenge? Who did you go to for that? What was the biggest success? How were you instrumental in the success of them? If you had a chance to go back 5 years ago when you were doing that, what would you do differently if you had the chance to be in your own
Oh
ear?
man.
And so
Yeah.
I think as you're going through that, you can see how well, or I guess not well, for lack of better terms, that they aren't being able to articulate that. If it's not just right off the cusp, and you can feel that emotion and that passion, that energy coming from them, then that maybe they weren't involved in all of that. And they were particularly responsible for all of those aspects. And so when I think about a candidate talking through that, if you can get into the weeds with that, you can really uncover their thing. And then I think the last piece, and I love this question, is when I talk to an individual about their superpowers. And I got to give a shout out to Katie McDonald. She's a friend and a mentor that I've been knowing over the last couple of years with a client of mine. And she asked this question, and it's interesting enough because when I check a reference for clients, I ask the same question. And most people, when they look at it, they say, okay, a superpower. What is a superpower? A superpower is not a strength. A superpower is something that is an intangible aspect of you as a person that without a doubt, it's on the tip of your tongue. You can talk about it. You're excited about it. And that company is going to be in a better position now that you're a part of their company and you are bringing this one thing to the organization. Now, if you're a good salesperson or a good interviewer, per se, you can then flip that and say, okay, great. Well, what's something you're working on? And then now you can uncover what you're going to get into and whether or not you're ready to bite off where that individual's maybe challenges or pitfalls or some of the things that they're working on, because there's nothing worse than a surprise after getting hired into a company.
Yeah, and then maybe I like that too. I like the kind of 1-2 punch in that they ask you what your superpower is. If you get that question and they say, "Well, what are the projects you're working? I can apply. Let me show you how my superpower would apply to that particular situation." I can see that being a valuable conversation as well. Two-way street. Both people. It's sometimes I think we forget that both people should be interviewing. The candidate should be interviewing the company as well, and sometimes we
Yeah.
forget that. I'm curious what you think. How much damage can one bad hire do in MedTech? to a company?
Yeah. Well, I've seen it in a wide range of things, and it doesn't just have to be MedTech. I think it
Right.
could be any organization. If you're a really, really big company, we'll say a Fortune 100 company, you can fall between the cracks and you can, kind of blend in and be cancer and really not be it may not you may not come out as fast and be a disaster. However, if you're a mid to small sized company, sometimes those companies, every hire is critical and every hire is crucial. And I believe that when you hire the wrong individual and you don't look at the intangible traits that they're bringing to the company, it can be disastrous. And I think it comes from, I talked a little bit about this a couple weeks ago on a podcast that I was on, and I talked about how when small startup companies hire their first critical leaders that are going to be the face and the individual that is driving the strategy within the organization, everything is a trickle down effect from that person. And so even though you might think that one person may not change the dynamic of a whole organization, it can bleed quickly and can be a catastrophe.
Yeah, I remember an article I read, I think it was the Kellogg Institute or a Kellogg Insight that talked about how sitting next to a high performer within 25-foot radius can increase your productivity by 15%. And alternatively, sitting next to a really poor performer can actually drag you down even worse than the 15%. I don't know where they got the numbers. Maybe I'll try to reference that and put it in the show notes if someone wants to look further into that. But I am a believer in, what is that phrase? You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. No attribution that I have at the moment, but I think it matters. Alternatively, maybe if I flip the question on its head, what's the cost of leaving key roles unfilled for too long? And obviously, it's gonna depend on each role, but I can see that maybe having a deleterious effect as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. That's my job as a salesperson, is be able to uncover what those impacts could be. And, some companies are very open and honest about it and say, hey, if we don't get this filled, here's what this is going to do. We're trying to commercialize, we're trying to develop a new product, we're trying to bring a new prototype to the market. And it's easy to quantify those numbers. If we don't make this shipment, we're out X. However, I think a lot of companies really keep that close to the chest, and it's my job to try to do my tactics to try to uncover that so that I can provide the best value, because hiring is hard. Hiring is critical. And I have seen a lot of times where companies will have a tendency to look at a hire as a transaction versus looking at a hire as a critical moment within that business to produce X or produce Y. And then they come late to the game. They're 3 months, 6 months behind, and then they make bad decisions. They have a quota that they have to hit, or they lose that budget. And again, a lot of different situations to where if you stay ahead of it and you know that what that risk is going to be, you can quantify it and say, okay, it's worth the time to do this now. Get it done.
That makes sense. If I were to ask about maybe some outdated practices, I mean, MedTech and the medical device industry, when I look at there are aspects of it that are very antiquated. And one of the things we're at Greenlight Guru, our goal is to try to improve those quality management system practices, clinical evaluation practices. And I'll just share a real quick story because it is related to that attracting talent, keeping talent. I was pulled into a sales process at one point. The sales guy asked me, he's like, "Hey, Etienne, I want you to talk to the CEO of this medical device company. They have a QMS and he's real proud of it. I want to see if you can see if he's looking for cheeks in the armor." So I go into this sales call. The whole engineering team's on the call. The CEO's proudly showing me what he's built. And I'm looking at it. I'm like, "Do you build this in Access?" He said, "Yes." So we talked about it. I'm like, "You have built something amazing, my friend. You might be able, you have all this automation and all the engineering's." I see their face behind him. I said, "But is your team actually adopting this? It looks like it might be too difficult to use." And they're all like, "Ugh." And we almost had a heart to heart moment at that. And so I just use an example. Are there any things that are outdated or things that we talked at the beginning of attracting talent from outside MedTech. Are there any things that detract talent from MedTech in your mind?
Yeah. Wow. That's a really that's a really good question. I imagine you crushed it on that meeting, by the way.
It was
Uh, you,
fun,
you,
but but yeah.
yeah. It's interesting. Coincidentally enough, I had an interview yesterday with a gentleman, and we talked about the med tech industry and his non-interest of going into it. And a couple things revolved around it. And this isn't just him, but it's kind of top of mind because I just had the conversation. Number one is the process and the documentation, and that process dictates design versus design dictates process. It's something that I think that I've really come to adopt in being part of medical and in defense. Now, some people don't like that. They like to be able to say, I want to make this work and I want to take this widget and make it a widget. And I'm going to come up with a prototype and I'm going to launch it and I'll prove it works later on. I'm not going to prove the process as I'm going through. That's one thing. I think another thing that I've seen is that, and it's not as prevalent, but what medical device is. I mean, you're there to help improve people's lives, but there are also a risk factor of you designing something that could be a detriment to them or could hurt them. Or you could be part of an organization, as a lot of stuff was going around with COVID and different vaccines and things like that. And do you believe in that? And are you are you on board with the the good and the bad that comes with that stuff?
Yeah.
And I think politics plays into that. I think news plays into that, which could create a negative connotation. But the people that are working at these big companies, they're not the ones that are designing these pharmaceutical products or this medication or whatever it may be. A lot of them are part of the process and manufacturing and packaging and things like that. And at the end of the day, it's there to make somebody's life better. But there is a piece to where there is a negative thing that will come with that. With all good comes some bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think you can't get to a point where you're trying to attract all people. You have to be good at something, and you're going to attract that certain type of person that will be attracted to that. But what I really liked that you said was about the negative, the potential for harm. You can't get away from that. And it's kind of like when I've looked at some happiness studies recently, and I'll try to tie this back, but happiness versus unhappiness, we usually look at it as like, I'm either happy or I'm unhappy. But in reality, in our brains, we have a happiness lever and you have unhappiness levers. Working out will decrease your unhappiness. Spending time with your family may increase your happiness. Those are two different separate things, and you kind of take the sum of each. When I think about a company, you have things that attract your talent and you have things that detract, and you have to be honest and understand those. And I think that's kind of, you said that very well. If we talk about a company's first hire or a manager's first hire or a hire that maybe it's not their first hire, but this is a critical hire, what do you see as really important in this process?
Yeah. Well, going back to that, I 100% agree with you with what you were talking about to those different levers. And that comes down to the values. Like, what are you trying to show as a value as an organization that I can highlight and focus on that is going to attract this talent to my company? And that kind of goes back to that one of those first questions that you asked me. And so when I think about, a first hire, say it's a new manager, they're in a new role, maybe they got promoted to a quality manager, director, regulatory, whatever it may be. I think it's first and foremost, you need to be clear on the expectations of what you're trying to look for. It is so important to break those two down because expectations of responsibilities and requirements are two separate things. A lot of companies try to put qualifications or, job expectations, but that doesn't always define what the person's responsible for versus what they're expected. And so you as the manager, number one, need to be able to understand what that is. Number two is you have to be on board that that is what you want in the company. And that, I think if you go into number three, you have the right people that are part of that process that are also on board that that is what you want and that is what the company wants. So many times you'll see companies pull all of these people in from different areas that don't have anything to do with the leadership, the guidance, the development of that individual, however they want to say in who they're going to hire and what the person that they're going to bring in. And I think that could be really detrimental, really, really detrimental. And when I think about like me, if I'm going to hire a new person, or if I'm going to hire my first person, I'm going to want to know what those personality traits are, and do they align with my personality traits? Will I be able to know that I'm going to go through some challenges? I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to need to have a mentor that is going to be alongside of me to help let me make those mistakes, help pick me up and help me develop this person while also teaching me and helping me get better in this job. And so I've seen so many times to where companies will bring someone in, they'll interview them, and the manager doesn't really know what they're looking for. They say, well, we're looking for this, but that's not really defined. Two is the person's never really interviewed. They don't know how to interview. They don't know what to look for, and they don't have anybody kind of coaching them through it. Anytime you're a new manager, you have to have somebody that's going to be your backbone that you can say, what am I asking that's right? What am I asking that's wrong? Because you're going to be the one that's responsible at the end of the day for the success or failure of that individual.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's well said. And when we look at the micro and look at all those specific tactics that they need to have, I think that's really smart what you're saying about how you need to be honest if you know what you're actually after. Or is that really what you want? And sometimes when I look at my own self, you need an outside perspective telling you. So to having that sounding board, that mentor is really helpful. Any other things that you recommend about that process or specifics? Because I want to switch to macro here in a minute, but when I'm looking at like the one-on-one or that real nitty-gritty process, any other things you recommend or just thoughts you have?
In regards to
In regards to
interviewing,
the process of, well, interviewing and, maybe we'll take it one extension further. If someone were to use a talent recruitment firm, communicating with them is I would imagine just as critical as communicating with the actual interviewee then when the time comes, but relaying that information. Any thoughts or maybe any missteps that you see people commonly make?
yeah, that's a I think there's a lot of challenges
Loaded.
that companies
Yeah.
with that. That's a really, really big question. And I'll make sure to not ramble on this one because I could probably talk about that for
Sure.
20 straight. Then you're like, Kirk, this we're done. I gotta cut this. I think that I'll break it into a couple things. I think number one is companies really struggle with talent, just as it is. Hiring talent, bringing people in, and I think a lot of it comes down with the engagement. What is the engagement? What are they trying to do, and what is the process of how does this candidate feel? I could probably talk more about that. If we continue to talk through that. Number two is, you think about as a recruiter, like my job is to make your job easier. And to do that, we have to have constant communication. We have to have understanding of really what you're looking for. We need to be able to understand the ins and outs of your team, the culture and subculture of what you're trying to drive. And we think about all of this stuff. These are all of, again, the little things that all stack up. And if you look at recruiting or hiring as a transaction, you'll get a transactional result. But if you look at hiring or recruiting or onboarding, which I think are extremely critical as key drivers to making a successful business, you flourish. And even if you don't have the right people on board all the time, you have a tendency to err on the positive side to where you're winning way more than you're losing. And you can see that in attritions and reports And, you've got all these different platforms now that you can say, here's why I left the company. Here's why I left. Here's why I would never work there. There is a damage. Once that is done, that is really hard to overcome. So without probably talking for like 25 minutes just about that topic, that's kind of like in a nutshell what I'm thinking.
Yeah, a couple of the things that I picked up when you were talking was transactional. I kind of latched onto that a little bit. If you are hiring someone just to do XYZ, these are I want you to go perform these tasks, but you forget about how they are either building onto your culture or taking away from your culture. And of course, some companies don't even know what culture they have or what they're after, but you definitely feel it when you have what you don't want. You recognize that. So I think that really is important to think about. You're not just bringing in someone to perform a task, but you're bringing someone in to be a team member. And my thoughts on team and business have evolved over the years, and I'm on board now. But that's really good. I like that. I want to zoom out and I want to ask, and you can feel free to punt this question if you want, but a lot of things have changed. You mentioned COVID. So going back to 2020, that was an incredible change because now people are working from anywhere. And even after that, now people are going back and there's lots of different things. But now even we have a new administration. The federal cuts there've been a lot of federal cuts, and I'm not trying to get into politics, but what I am curious about from a macro view, have you seen any trends, especially as it relates to 2025, that you feel like we need to be paying attention to this, or when it comes to hiring, companies are going to struggle because of this one thing. Is there anything that kind of stands out? Anything that companies would really benefit to be aware of right now?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So to talk about the first part, like the 2025 trends and what does that look like? The medical devices industry and the pharma industry is going to get hit, in some aspects, and it may not be detrimental because that's one of the things I love about medical device is that there's a sustainability to it. There's the FDA, there's the EU, there's always process and engagements and improvements that need to be had. There, people are getting older. People are going to continue to get elderly and need, different parts of healthcare. And that constantly has to evolve in order to make our lives better, especially as our population continues to age. But with some of the administration, with some of the things that happen, there is flaws. There's a lot of companies that are in this. Oh, wait, what am I? Maybe let's just kind of punt this for the first quarter, which makes sense in some aspects. However, they then have to understand the repercussions of that over the next 9 months and then making up for that lost time. And then what happens is kind of being overwhelmed and then coming to companies like myself and saying, I need someone yesterday. It's like, okay, that's fantastic. But do you know what now that means? And are you all in to do that? So I think that's number one. When you talk about like what stands out in hiring within the MedTech as things continue to evolve is, I think companies need to remember whether they're large or small, what the purpose is and continue to showcase the values of what separates them in the market versus their competitors. They can't do it all. You can't have everything. You can't have bonus, salary, opportunity, growth, stock, remote, hybrid. Again, list can go on and on. You have to make sacrifices, but you have to stick to those sacrifices and understand that you're trying to attract certain type of individual. And you have to be excited about that. You have to be confident about that. And you have to know at the end of the day that you're going to bring the right people to the company. Part of it has to be patience, but part of it has to be that you know what you stand for and that these are the reasons why. I talk about this all the time. Why is the candidate or the person that's joining your company, why is their life now better than where the company that they were previously at? And you as an organization, from a Fortune 100 company to a 3-person startup, need to understand and know what that value is and what separates you from all of the other companies that are out there. That's my thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's strong. You talk about the immediate that could be the immediate current events. It could be handling causing people problems, but by not just taking on and pursuing your goals, I mean, you're going to pay the piper later. I think that's a good point. I mean, the market goes up and down, and those who stay in it are the winners. So MedTech needs to just keep on moving. And so I appreciate that piece of advice.
Yeah,
Any
absolutely.
last piece of advice that you have that you'd give every MedTech hiring? If you could just get them all in one room and say, all right, guys, I'm going to sit you down. Is there just one piece of advice? If you could sum it all up into one piece that you give every MedTech hiring manager today?
One piece of advice that I would give every MedTech hiring manager. Wow, that's a really good question.
Take as much
It's
time as you
usually
want. I
like,
can cut it out.
yeah, it's usually like 10 things, it's not usually one. If when I think about this industry and I think about hiring, I think about recruiting, I think about attracting talent, I think about, getting the right people on the bus to, get you to where you want to go. And I first and foremost, I love what I do. I'm very passionate about what I do. I think maybe that's why you and I have connected so well, is I think you see and you feel that passion. Partnering with a recruiter who doesn't want to treat you as a transaction and really wants to build a rapport, understand your company, understand your culture, understand the inner workings of what good looks like, understand what a great hire means and what A means to you or what A plus means to you, and truly go into a partnership is one of the best situations that I've seen for a lot of my clients. Now, you've got internal recruitment that can fill a large, robust amount of rooms, which is fantastic. I'm not looking to compete with those. But when you think about those strategic niche, critical roles, don't wait. So many times I'm on a call tomorrow with a client and this role has been open for 8 months. It's an embedded firmware, electrical, class two, medical device combination product, and they're struggling to fill it. And it's getting to a point to where 8 months have gone by. What opportunity costs? What risks are you now at for not hiring that individual? And then now we're going to potentially, not we, but you as an organization, start to make sacrifices. When if you get it early in the game, those sacrifices don't need to be had. So I guess my piece of advice is maybe a little bit of plugs for me. It's like hire a recruiter who knows what they're doing. And it may not always be me. There's a lot of great recruiters that are out there, but partner with somebody who truly is vested in the benefit of your organization and doesn't just want to treat you as a transaction, but wants to get to know the inner workings of what good looks like so that they can believe in you, they can believe in your company. And at the end of the day, they feel great about making a successful placement into a great organization. That's my thoughts.
I like it. We at Greenlight Grew, our goal is to make jobs easy to the point where you can focus not on building a QMS like that guy I recommend, that kind of the story I mentioned, and engineers can focus on engineering, or you can focus on building a medical device. And I think it's the same for you. If the goal for a medical device company is to build a great medical device company, don't just focus on these other tasks where people with specialization and the niche contacts like you have could make that so much easier and so much more seamless. So that makes sense. And I guess the second thing I would say to the audience is if you're an embedded firmware with class two professional experience, reach out to Kirk right now. All right.
Yeah, this could be lit pretty quick. It's exciting time. This is good times right now.
Where can people go to find you and learn more about you and your process and the things that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of ways. One is LinkedIn. You'll see a picture of myself and my family. I've got two kids and a wonderful wife, Trissy. That is kind of a picture. I think that kind of illustrates who I am as a person. I'm a family man and love spending time with my kids. So get a chance to own my own business so that I can do that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
like coach and teach and do that kind of stuff. They can find me on LinkedIn. They can email me at kirk@tfrecruiting.com. Then we have two different websites as part of our organization. We have a Talent Factor recruiting website, which is part of our Charleston and maintenance types of roles that we support. And then we have a different division, which is the division that I support, which is talentfactorymedical.com, which focuses all on biotech, medical device, MedTech, pharma, that kind of stuff.
All right. Awesome. Well, we'll try to include all of those links in the show notes so that people can find you as well and learn more about what you're doing. Thank you so much, Kirk, for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate all the insights you shared, and hope you're able to find those software developers and everyone else who you're working with. Really appreciate it, and the things that you're doing for the industry to try to make those connections. Those who've been listening, thank you so much. We hope this episode has been valuable to you. If you enjoyed it, send us a link. Send us a message. Send Kirk a message. Let him know what you think on LinkedIn. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you all. But until then, we will see you all next time. Everybody, take care. Thanks for tuning in to the Global Medical Device Podcast. If you found value in today's conversation, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. If you've got thoughts or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@greenlight.guru. Stay connected for more insights into the future of MedTech innovation. And if you're ready to take your product development to the next level, visit us at www.greenlight.guru. Until next time, keep innovating and improving the quality of life.